So, there's a very interesting theory out there that I want to share with you. And the theory says this: you have about 5 years left to get rich. Because once AI gets strong enough that anyone can make anything, if you don't own some part of that future, you will never own anything at all. You will be forever stuck at whatever money level you are at today. Now, Elon Musk has talked about this future a lot, and he thinks there are two possible outcomes. Do you think it's going to be some kind of universal basic income thing? Do you think there's going to be some other kind of solution that has to be put in place? Working will be optional, because you'll have robots plus AI. And in a good situation, we will have a universal high income, not just a universal basic income. The first outcome is the good one, which says that if that were to happen, don't worry, money might not even exist. Robots will just do our jobs for us. Now, the second outcome, though, is not so good. It's a continuation of what we are starting to see, which is a K-shaped economy where the poor get poorer and the rich get richer. And AI draws the line through that, which will forever freeze wherever people are in life right now. Now, it's kind of dark and sad, but let's just say that's actually going to happen. What would that even look like? Well, it might look like what we're kind of seeing right now. The markets would start to hit all-time highs across the board. Stocks, also known as the S&P 500, would hit an all-time high. The average age of first-time home buyers would be at an all-time high. Gold would go to an all-time high because countries like China and the US are buying it and storing it as a possible replacement for the US dollar. Silver would also go to an all-time high. And not just the music metals, but all goods across the board. Even debt, like government debt, company debt, and household debt, would go to an all-time high. And it's kind of interesting to ask, why is that happening right now? Is there going to be some big global conflict like World War II? Maybe. Is it an AI bubble and everything's about to crash? Maybe. Obviously, no one knows the truth. So I'm not going to sit here and make predictions about crashes or bubbles or the end of the world. Instead, I want to do something a little bit more interesting. I'm going to give you a simple explanation of one of the most interesting experiments of money and what money could look like in 5 music years' time. It's this experiment of running a global debt-based world with constant money printing at the same time that AI takes away the room people used to have to build something new. Now, this is super nerdy stuff, but it's the kind of nerdy stuff that I think is super fun. So, with that said, let's get into it. Hi, my name is Andre Jick. Hope you're doing well. Come for the finance and stay for AI.so. I just first want to say that this video is just a theory. It is not a prediction of what's going to happen. So let me just start right here with a very basic question, which is, what is an economy supposed to do? And what it's supposed to do is go through cycles, right? Go up and go down. But human beings don't like that. We're like, well, maybe I don't want it to go down. I want it to go up for as long as possible because that's what makes me money. Well, because of that, we have economic tools that we use to keep things going up for as long as possible because we like stocks to go up. So what do? We lower interest rates. We give out money to people. We do something called quantitative easing. For example, 40% of all US dollars in existence were created after 2020 because central banks created new money and used it to buy government bonds from investors, basically putting more money into the system, whatever you want to call it. Okay, but what if we didn't do any of that? What if we just left the economy alone? Here's what would happen, and it's a very simple idea by Jeff Booth, which is this: the natural state of the economy would become deflationary. And all that means is that if the amount of money in the world stayed the same while technology kept getting better, the price of everything would go down. Things would get cheaper, and they'd get cheaper because humans are amazing, and over time we make things better, faster, and cheaper. Now, obviously that does not describe our world today. Instead, our world somehow gets more expensive over time. The price of things 100 years ago was less than the cost of things today. Why? It's not because things got harder to make. It's because the supply of money kept growing. Because the government kept printing more. And when they did that, what we experienced, the way we lived life, is that the total wealth in the world went up about 5 times since the year 2000, from about 160 trillion to music around $600 trillion, which is about 5.4 times the entire world's yearly output. Now, if you invested in those things, you got richer. Except what really happened is the value of the dollar went down music compared to those things. And if all you did was save money without putting it into all that stuff, you lost some of what you could buy with it. That's the way it's always been, which is why over a long time those things look like they go up forever. Okay, then, so the next question is, what is happening to the economy right now? And it's going into what people are calling the K-shaped economy. A K-shaped economy is what happens when society splits into two different directions. One line goes up and the other line goes down, like the two arms of the letter K. Now, on the top side of that line are people who own things, stocks, houses, businesses, ideas, anything that benefits from easy money. On the bottom side of the line are people who mostly rely on their paycheck music and their savings. Their costs go up, but their income doesn't always keep up at the same rate as their costs. That's what we have right now because the top 10% of US earners now make up about half of all the spending in the country. At the same time, the bottom 80% of earners make up only about 37% of all spending. That is a K-shaped economy. So that dividing line is roughly $175,000. Families that earn above that amount are living la vida loca. They're out there spending on birthday parties and big, fancy weddings and large trips abroad music, and growing their spending every single month. And the rest of America, the bottom 80%, they're being careful. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but so what? Hasn't that always been the case? We've all heard the saying, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And this is true. Something like the top 10% of people own 90% of stocks right now. And snorts, just the top 1% own something like 50% of all the stocks. There have always been rich people and poor people in this divide, this pattern, right? But here's the difference between where we are right now and where we could be 5 years from now. Right now, people can move between the economic lines. You could start at the bottom and work your way up. You could learn a skill, start a business, find a gap, and take advantage of some opportunity that hasn't been solved yet, and become rich. The economy today is not frozen. The ability to move up comes from finding these gaps, finding places where things can be made better. That's where businesses exist. But now let's throw AI into the picture. Artificial intelligence makes the whole system so much more efficient and faster than any human being. Over time, then, the gap between how things are right now and how things could be in the future is going to close. AI squeezes that gap down to almost nothing because when everyone can use AI to build websites and write code, study the stock market, make content, set up automatic systems, whatever it is you do, then it becomes really easy for anyone to do anything, and it becomes a lot harder to move from the bottom of the K to the top. Now, for people at the top of this economy, the people who already own things, this is great. Their money becomes more useful than ever. But for people at the bottom, it becomes harder to own anything because fewer and fewer gaps are left to solve, right? That's how, at a certain point, AI could potentially freeze wherever we are in life money-wise. So that means our goal has to be, between now and the future, to own some productive part of it. Could be anything: stocks, gold, real estate, the IPD, your social media, anything you can trademark or copyright before someone makes a better version in the near future. Now, some people say this could happen as quickly as 8 to 12 months. I don't think it's going to be that fast, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was as fast as 5 to 10 years from now. Okay, so the next question is, if that were to actually happen, then wouldn't money just not exist anymore? And wouldn't robots just do everything for us? And wouldn't everyone get some kind of universal basic income? Maybe. That's what Elon says is one of the outcomes. Personally, I think the answer depends on what we think money actually is. What is money? And here's where things get very interesting and super nerdy, because there are two competing theories. But first, here's something I've been personally doing to keep stacking sats while this plays out, with the Gemini credit card, which is the sponsor of this segment, and it's a card I've been using for a while now. All opinions are my own, and we're not influenced by Gemini. I use it like any regular credit card for gas, groceries, and travel, but I earn Bitcoin every time I use it. It has no annual fees. You can see the rates and fees in the description for more info, but you get up to 4% back in over 50 cryptocurrencies instantly, and you can choose which one you want. Personally, I've got mine set to Bitcoin, but that's 4% on gas, transit, and rideshare, 3% on dining, 2% on groceries, and 1% on everything else. It's a MasterCard World Elite, and I've used it internationally with no issues. And every time I use it, it adds Bitcoin to my portfolio. And the best part is you're investing as you spend. In fact, according to Gemini, cardholders who earned and held their Bitcoin for 1 year saw an average increase in value of 277%. And those are not your typical credit card points. So if you're interested, Click the link in the description or go to gemini.com/Andre to get $200 in Bitcoin when you spend $3,000 in your first 90 days. Thank you, Gemini, for sponsoring this segment. And now, let's get back to IT.so. Here are the two competing theories. On one side, you have what's called the Keynesian theory of economics, and on the other side, you have the Austrian theory of economics. These are the two theories that tell us what money is by explaining what an economy should do and what role, if any, governments and central banks should play in all of it. Now, today the experiment we're living through is called the Keynesian theory of economics. Every country in the world is living through it. And here's how it works. It starts with a very simple idea. People are not always smart about money, right? Economies are not stable on their own. If we leave the economy alone, it would fall into a recession or a depression, which causes a lot of pain, unemployment, and makes a lot of people sad. Therefore, governments and central banks have to help us during those tough times. How do they help? Well, they help by making it easier to borrow money, by lowering interest rates, spending music more than they earn, which means borrowing more than earning, and maybe putting more money into the system so that people keep spending. In a Keynesian economy, stopping a collapse is way more important than letting the market reset, even if that means we're going to have higher debt, which is what we have right now as a country. Music, it's even more important even if it means the price of things like houses goes up and makes more people renters. So from that point of view, a world where stocks and housing and other things are at all-time highs doesn't mean something is broken. It's actually the system working exactly as it was designed. And Keynesians believe that the price of everything in this world should go up by about 2% each year. Why? Because they believe it encourages people to spend their money rather than save it. Hold on. Why would we want to encourage people to spend rather than save? Because they argue it's our constant spending that pushes us to create better things. If all we did was save our money, there wouldn't be a Disneyland. There wouldn't be a McDonald's, right? That's the Keynesian point of view. Now, the Austrian point of view looks at all of that and says, none of that is true. Don't believe any of that. Now, the Austrian school of thought has a very different idea about what money should be. And at the core, Austrian economics believes that the world works better when it's allowed to fail from time to time. And our money should be based on truth. Okay, what is the truth? The truth is this. If you save money, you should be rewarded. The price of things over time should get cheaper for you. But if it isn't, then you don't live in a truthful world. And let me put this into a little bit more context, because if the founding fathers were around today, they'd be debating the exact same thing. And they actually did, except they didn't call it Austrian versus Keynesian because it wasn't labeled that yet. But the debate they had was, can money be expanded and borrowed against safely, or does it always kind of end the same way? Now, they didn't all agree at once, but if you look at Thomas Jefferson, for example, he believed that borrowing money was so dangerous that if we were allowed to, we would create more and more paper money. And governments, if not watched closely, would do this to pay for wars and make political promises. Now, Thomas Jefferson warned us that allowing banks and central powers to control money would take away the people's property until their children wake up homeless. So the Austrian school of economics says if you give a government the ability to print money, it will eventually become corrupt, because by doing that, they remove the consequences of their bad decisions. Because if money can be music printed, and if you don't let the system fail from time to time, and you don't let the economy go through downturns, then you kind of stop the natural cleaning process of a fair economy. And that's why they argue that central banks and businesses and economies should be allowed to fail, because failing removes the bad, corrupt people from the system. And if you don't let them fail, and you save some banks and some companies but not others, you're just letting financial interests decide who gets to win and who gets to fail. And those decisions might not be fair because the people making them may also be corrupt. So for Austrian economists, the answer to what is money is that money should be what's called hard money, like gold or silver, for example. We could still use paper money, but it should be tied to something solid that the government can't make more of, because in a world where they can, everything eventually breaks and we just pass that problem on to the next generation. Okay then, so back to the original question. If in 5 years AI takes over, will we live in a world of plenty where we don't need money, or will we live in a world of economic slavery? And I think the answer depends on how we vote with our money. Now, under the current system we live in right now, the Keynesian experiment, the hopeful version looks like this. Yeah, we're not going to need a job because robots do it for us, and we'll probably have some kind of universal basic income, some kind of stimulus, and the government will decide how much you need when you get it and under what conditions, digital ID, surveillance, and all that stuff. And maybe that works, maybe music doesn't. But the risk is that the more the system gets involved, music, the more power it gathers. And once people don't produce any value for society, whoever controls the money controls access to life itself and who holds the power. And I would argue we're seeing a lot of independent reporters expose a lot of that system's corrupt actions playing out right now. Now, the Austrian version of this economy looks very different. Because Austrian economists say if technology truly makes the world cheaper, the money that we save should show that. If the world really is getting better at making things, then prices should go down. If robots do the work, people should benefit by being able to buy more stuff, not because the government gave them more money, but because they own things. They own good money and things that cannot lose their value. And on some level, I think people know that we're in this transition. And we see the markets going higher and higher because we're all trying to get on the right side of this K-shaped economy. Now, the real question of this video is actually this. Are we watching the last phase of an economy where moving up comes from finding gaps, before we move into a world where moving up only comes from owning things? In other words, this may be the last moment in time where you can get ahead by building a business and owning something important, because in the future, the only way to get ahead is if you already own something of value. And if that's the case, then we have a limited amount of time. Might be 5 years, might be 10, I don't know. But we have a limited amount of time to set ourselves up before that gap closes and we're stuck there for generations, because there's no more room left to improve anything. All right, how do I tie this into Bitcoin? All right, I do know. So, Bitcoin is one of the few things that you can own that lets you live through the lens of this Austrian system of economics, because all Bitcoin is to me is one of the only reference points that shows us the truth about the world. What is the truth about the world? This is the third time I'm asking this question, so hopefully you can answer it. The truth is, if you save money, the world should be getting cheaper. Now, I told you it isn't, but that's not the full picture. Everything actually is getting cheaper. Everything compared to Bitcoin is worth less today than it was 10 years ago. Pokemon cards, gold, art, watches, cars, real estate, the stock market. They're all getting cheaper when compared to true, hard, fixed money. The way that Austrian economists believe the world should be today snorts the way that Thomas Jefferson imagined it. Now, that's obviously not me telling you to buy or invest in Bitcoin, but it's sort of how I understand it, music, and it's how I choose to vote with my money. And I don't know the answer to this question. How much time do we really have? Maybe we have 100 years. Or maybe it doesn't matter and everything will be great. I don't know. But that's why I made this video, because I think it's an interesting thought experiment. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll make a video showing all my investments and my plan for the next 5 years and how I'm personally preparing for this, because it's been a while. But I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Smash the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. I'd love to see you back here next week. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.